How much do you really know about history? Well, let's face it, pretty much everything we learn in school is a lie. And if that's true, why should you believe anything you read in a history book or see in a documentary? But don't worry, because here are 20 crazy history facts you won't learn anywhere else. Part 3. The Senate of Rome once declared war on a horse. In 64 BC, Roman Emperor Gaius Julius Caesar was just minding his own business walking through the streets of Rome, when he was nearly run over by a runaway horse. This enraged him so much that he immediately went to the Senate and told them they were declaring war on the horse. Okay, but why would a group of intelligent people go to war with a literal animal? Well, according to Livy, the historian, the Senate argued that the horse's owner was negligent and should have had better control of their animal. Plus, Caesar had such influence that the Senate basically did whatever he wanted them to do. So after making this declaration, they spent all their efforts trying to capture the horse, which wasn't easy since it apparently ran around the circus for a whole day before being caught. But after all that hard work, the horse was declared a public enemy and executed in front of everyone. Oh, and the owner got off without any punishment at all. Ancient Greek and Roman statues weren't actually bare. Even though most famous statues of Greek and Roman gods and heroes are depicted as naked, that wasn't how they were originally made. In fact, they all wore elaborate robes that signified their status and wealth. However, during the Renaissance, the classical statues were rediscovered, and people began copying the Greeks and Romans who were known for their superior art and culture. Because of this, many of the statues ended up in museums and eventually became the default images of ancient gods like Zeus and Apollo. Napoleon didn't actually die in exile. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the most famous military leaders and dictators of all time. After his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo, he was exiled to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he died in 1821. Or did he? Author and historian Philip Dwyer argues that Napoleon faked his death and escaped to an island in the Indian Ocean with some help from the British East India Company. To back up his theory, he points out that there were no autopsies performed, and the only evidence of Napoleon's death was eyewitness testimony from people who had a lot to gain by reporting his death, not to mention a series of strange coincidences. For example, Napoleon predicted a volcanic eruption would happen while he was in exile, and sure enough, one did. Also, when his remains were brought back to France in 1840, DNA testing revealed that they might belong to someone else entirely. So maybe Napoleon isn't dead after all. The Austrian army once fought against themselves during the Battle of Karansabes. The Austrian army faced off against the Ottoman Empire. The confusion led to heavy casualties on both sides, until finally, a single cannon shot turned everything around. You see, the smoke from the cannon was so thick that it prevented the Austrians from seeing anything, leading them to start shooting at each other. It took several hours for the smoke to clear away and for the troops to realize what had happened. When the dust settled, over 150 soldiers lay dead and hundreds more were injured. Poland was ruled by a woman named Bona Sforza. In the year 1573, Poland needed a new king, and the nobility decided to invite Bona Sforza to take the throne. The problem was, she was already married to Francesco I, Duke of Saxony. But hey, two kings are better than one, right? Well, not exactly, you see. Bona and her husband ruled over Poland for 4 years, stealing as much money as they could before leaving the country virtually bankrupt. They were then invited to rule over the Duchy of Milan instead, where they continued their lavish spending until they were kicked out again. Finally, they settled in Rome, where they lived out the rest of their days in luxury. The Byzantine Empire was 5 times more densely populated than modern New York. During its peak in the 10th century, Constantinople was the largest city in the world, with over 5 million people living inside its walls. To put that into perspective, even today, New York only has around 9 million people in its entire metro area. And during World War II, London only had about 10 million people living in the whole city. So you can imagine how crowded and chaotic Constantinople must have been. Diarrhea used to be considered a good thing. Throughout much of human history, diarrhea was seen as a positive thing, something that helped cleanse the body of toxins and waste. It wasn't until relatively recently that scientists discovered the negative effects of diarrhea, like dehydration and malnutrition. Now, of course, we know that diarrhea is never a good thing unless you're constipated. Ancient Greece was actually closer to the Middle East than it was to Italy. Ancient Greece was located on the southern tip of the Balkan Peninsula, which is now part of modern-day Greece. Italy, on the other hand, is located hundreds of miles to the west across the Mediterranean Sea. As the crow flies, Greece is actually closer to countries like Egypt and Turkey than it is to Italy. The Last Supper is missing a few important people. When you look at Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper, you will notice that Jesus and his disciples are all sitting at the table except for one very important person, Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus. He was supposedly hiding behind Jesus in the painting, but over the centuries, someone scratched him out, along with John the Baptist. There's no real reason to explain why this happened, but some historians suggest it may have been done to protect the painting from religious fanatics, who might have seen John as a threat to Christianity. Ancient Sparta was the original meritocracy. Ancient Sparta was a small city-state in ancient Greece that valued strength and military prowess above all else. Girls were expected to exercise, fight, and compete in athletic competitions, just like boys. And if they proved themselves to be strong enough, they were allowed to become soldiers. Even more remarkably, the Spartans elected their leaders based on their skills and abilities, rather than their social status or wealth, making them the first known meritocracy in the world. For centuries, pineapples in the 18th century used to be rented as a symbol of wealth and power. Renting a pineapple was a sign that you had money to burn, because they were expensive to transport and required a special device to keep them cool. Once the pineapple arrived, it would be placed in a wooden box with holes in it to keep it cool, and the key would be given to the person renting it so they could show off their wealth. Eventually, the trend died out because people realized it was just easier to grow their own pineapples. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's wife could only eat her cucumbers chopped. Sultans of the Ottoman Empire were known for being incredibly lazy and decadent. One sultan's wife complained that she didn't want to choke on a cucumber while eating, so the sultan issued a decree that all cucumbers delivered to the palace must be chopped finely to prevent her from choking. This caused quite a stir among the populace, who were forced to buy special choppers to cut their own cucumbers as well. Eventually, the sultan's wife choked on a piece of chopped cucumber, and the decree was repealed. Hawaii was annexed by the United States in 1893. In 1893, a group of white businessmen and missionaries overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy and annexed the islands to the United States. This event is known as the Hawaiian Revolution, but it's not widely taught in schools, because it was a shameful moment for Americans. In fact, the Hawaiian monarchy is still in existence today, and they've never given up hope of regaining their independence. The dildo was invented thousands of years before the wheel. The first evidence of a dildo was found in the Czech Republic, and it dates back to as early as 15,000 years ago. The oldest known wheel, on the other hand, wasn't invented until around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia. That means the dildo was around for at least 12,000 years before the wheel. Vikings raided England for over 1,000 years. The Viking Age is generally considered to have lasted from the 8th to the 11th centuries. During this time, Vikings raided, traded, and explored all over Europe, North Africa, and even North America. In fact, the first European to set foot in North America was a Viking named Leif Erikson, around the year 1000. He established a settlement in Newfoundland, Canada, but it was abandoned only a few years later. Ancient Rome was 8 times more densely populated than modern New York. The population of ancient Rome peaked in the 2nd century AD, when it reached an estimated 1 million people. Today, New York has a population of about 8 million people spread out over 300 square miles. So you can imagine how crowded and chaotic Rome must have been. Abraham Lincoln was almost assassinated 36 years before Lincoln's assassination. On February 22, 1865, an actor named John Wilkes Booth attempted to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. Booth snuck into Ford's Theater and shot Lincoln in the head, but luckily, he survived. Of course, we all know that Lincoln was eventually assassinated by Booth's brother, Lincoln's assassin. 4 months later, the Great Fire of London burned for 5 days straight. In 1666, a fire broke out in London and quickly spread throughout the city, burning over 16,000 houses and displacing over 100,000 people. It took 5 days for the fire to be extinguished, and even longer for the city to recover. But strangely, it didn't cause that much damage. Most of the buildings that were destroyed were old and dilapidated, so rebuilding the city actually improved its overall quality of life. So which fact surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to stay tuned for more crazy history facts.